This channel won't survive without your subscription and likes. Help me. Chad grinned smugly, clutching the torn button from the guardsman's uniform. And then, suddenly, the guardsman took a step forward. Just one movement, but there was something terrifying about it. Chad realized the situation had spiraled out of control. But the worst was yet to come. What happened next became legend. But let's start from the very beginning. London, near Buckingham Palace. The day was cool, but the tourist flow didn't slow down. Among the crowd, one man stood out. A tanned 50-something guy wearing a baseball cap with an American flag and a bright blue jacket. His name was Chad, and he was that kind of tourist. The one who visits Europe with a sense of superiority, scoffing at local traditions. In his hand was a cup of beer, and his tongue was already loose enough. In front of him stood a British guardsman, a tall, fair-skinned man in a traditional red uniform and a bearskin hat. His face remained stone-cold despite the string of idiotic remarks coming from Chad. "What's wrong with you, man?" Chad scoffed, stepping closer. "You think you're some kind of statue?" The crowd stirred. Some people pulled out their phones to record the scene, while others tried to pull the obnoxious tourist away. But words weren't enough for Chad. He wanted more. With reckless audacity, he grabbed the guardsman's uniform and yanked, tearing off a golden button. The crowd gasped. Tension filled the air. The guardsman shifted his shoulders slightly but remained motionless. Chad smirked, held up the button, and demonstratively shoved it into his pocket. The crowd rumbled like distant thunder before a storm. A wave of discontent swept through. Whispers, angry mutters, judgmental stares, piercing Chad like 100 invisible fingers pointing at him. People looked at him with disgust, with hatred, as if he had just crossed an unspoken line. But Chad didn't care. He took another sip of beer from his plastic cup, then spread his arms like a stand-up comedian whose joke had just bombed. "Relax, people. What's the big deal? It's just a button." His voice was mocking, brazen, like he had just pulled off a hilarious prank and the audience simply didn't get it. But no one laughed. Faces around him darkened. Some people shook their heads. A few Brits exchanged glances, disapproval etched into their expressions. "Bloody American," an elderly gentleman in a tweed coat muttered under his breath. A young woman with long blonde hair, dressed in business attire, turned sharply toward Chad, her lips pressing into a thin line. "That's beyond disrespectful." But the worst part? Even the children who had been watching the guards with fascination just moments before now looked at Chad with clear revulsion. Still, he didn't care. With a smug look, he shoved the button deeper into his pocket, casting a quick glance at the guardsman, who remained standing tall and unmoving, his face carved from stone. Then, something happened that Chad never expected. The guardsman took a step forward, sharp, precise. His boots clanked against the cobblestones with a metallic ring. It was just a single movement, but Chad froze instantly. The smirk slid off his face. He exhaled sharply, as if someone had just punched him in the gut. The crowd gasped. Someone shouted, "He moved!" And then a firm, authoritative voice rang out, filled with undeniable authority. "Sir, drop the button." The voice didn't belong to the guardsman. It was a Buckingham Palace security officer, a stocky man in his 40s, dressed in a black suit, his hair cropped short, his gaze unwavering. He moved toward Chad slowly, deliberately, his posture making one thing very clear. This is not a joke. Chad blinked, as if trying to process why all eyes were suddenly on him. He looked from the security officer to the guardsman, who still stood before him, tall, rigid, his face unreadable. A prickling sense of unease crept up Chad's spine, but he wasn't about to back down. "What? You're going to arrest me for this?" He threw his arms out theatrically, then laughed, but the sound was forced, nervous. "You guys are so uptight." Then the guardsman moved again. A quick, fluid motion, sudden yet calculated. And suddenly, the barrel of his rifle, bayonet attached, snapped forward with mechanical precision, pointed directly at Chad's face. He went rigid. For a moment, even the air seemed to freeze. The crowd erupted. People gasped. Some clapped. Others whipped out their phones to record. "Oh my God! He did it!" a woman shrieked, phone in hand. "That's what you get, asshole!" someone else shouted. Chad stumbled back, his heart hammering in his chest. Every muscle in his body tensed as if he'd been hit with an electric shock. His drunken bravado evaporated. Now he understood. This wasn't a game. The guardsman wasn't just some statue in a funny outfit. He was a soldier, a real one, trained, ready at any moment to turn a mocker into dust. And now he was looking straight at Chad, as if warning him, as if silently saying, "One more step and you'll find out exactly what I can do." Chad felt a sudden yank. Strong hands seized his arms and spun him around with force. He struggled, trying to break free, but the grip was ironclad. In front of him stretched the crowd, packed with people, their phone screens glowing. Everyone was filming him. "Are you serious? For a button?" he growled, thrashing in their grip. His voice shook, not from fear, but from anger. The kind of anger felt by someone who was used to always getting away with everything, only to suddenly face a reality where he wasn't in control. But the crowd didn't sympathize with him. On the contrary, they laughed. Some whispered to each other, others zoomed in on his twisted expression. "Look at him. Now he's scared," a guy in a green jacket shouted, laughing. "I bet he thought this was a joke," a woman added, folding her arms. But what enraged Chad the most was the silence of the guardsman. He just stood there, still, unmoving, his face as empty as before. But Chad felt that gaze. There was something in it, something that was driving him insane. He knew that look. It was the look of a man who had won. Rage boiled in Chad's chest. His fingers curled into fists, nails digging into his palms. "You think you're better than me, huh? You think you can just stand there acting like some damn robot?" Chad lunged forward, but the security guards held him tight. For the first time, he noticed a second guard, a tall man in a black suit with slicked-back blonde hair. The man looked at Chad with pure, ice-cold disdain. "Maybe in America you can do whatever you want, but here we have rules, mate." He spoke through gritted teeth before swiftly yanking the button from Chad's grasp. Chad screamed, not from pain, but from humiliation. The crowd erupted. The cameras caught every moment, how he was restrained, how he struggled uselessly, how the guard coldly reclaimed what he had stolen. "Did you see that? He took it back like a boss." A guy with a phone laughed. Chad jerked his shoulders violently. He was ready to explode. And then he was yanked backward. The guards twisted his arms behind him, and pain shot through his wrists. Chad howled. All right. I'm sorry, man. Chill out." But it was too late. The crowd no longer saw the cocky American who mocked British traditions. Now he was on his knees, face down, hands locked behind his back. Now he looked pathetic. And everyone was recording it. Chad thrashed, trying to break free, but his strength was gone. His arms were locked behind his back, wrists aching from the tight handcuffs. "Sir, you're under arrest for the destruction of military uniform." The security guard's voice was cold, unshaken, absolute. A deafening roar erupted from the crowd. People cheered. Some even whistled and clapped like they were at a concert. "Serves him right," the man in the tweed coat shouted with a satisfied grin. "That's what you get for disrespecting the Queen's Guard," someone called from deep in the crowd. Chad shrank. His throat was dry. His heart pounded in his ears, drowning out the noise. He felt the heat of shame creeping up his neck, turning his face a deep shade of red. The crowd had no pity for him. No one stepped in to defend him. They were enjoying this. Phones were pointed at him from every direction, dozens of cameras capturing every second of his humiliation. And Chad already knew what would happen next. In an hour, his video would flood social media. By tomorrow, he'd be a meme. In a week, he'd be that American. The one who thought he could do whatever he wanted, but paid the price. But the worst was yet to come. As the guards finally pulled him to his feet, leaving him swaying in front of the crowd, something happened that made everyone hold their breath. The guardsman, who had remained still this entire time, slowly turned his head. Just one movement. Silent, but deafening. And for the first time, he looked Chad directly in the eyes. It wasn't just a look. It was something personal, something cold, piercing, like an invisible punch to the gut. There was no anger in it, no contempt, just a fact. You lost. Chad froze. His heart pounded in his throat, his breath hitched. He stared into those eyes and realized. The guardsman wouldn't forget this. The crowd wouldn't forget this. No one would remember Chad as the cool guy, the funny tourist, the jokester. No, now he was part of a legend. The legend of the American who thought he could mock a queen's guard, and paid the price.